Diana, thank you for the introduction. Wanted to start off and just get Jeremy to provide some background and maybe lead us into the purpose and the motivations for creating the new SSF standard.
Thank you very much, Brian, and good afternoon and good morning and good evening, depending where you are joining us from in the world. It's a really good question to start the whole webinar off with, which is sort of why has the council introduced a whole new method of evaluating software? And I think the answer is you need to look at both the original PA-DSS program, Payment Application Data Security Program. That was developed really from the start of the council back in 2006. Back then, payments were very much an easier process, was very established, software was developed and then used for quite a long time, perhaps even over a period of a year before it was updated and would go through another evaluation before ongoing use. So the program as was developed back then was really good and fit for purpose. But as things have moved forward, as payments have changed significantly over the years, then we see that how we're using software has changed significantly. It's gone from being something we use for over a year to maybe software that has been developed for use at a particular event or over a short window. And so having a process that required software to be evaluated for perhaps 4 to 6 weeks, when it was only going to be used for a week, seemed to be a bit excessive and not really the right way or the right approach. The other thing that's changed significantly was that the actual amount of changes that people were making to the software. So we've gone from, as I said, probably an annual update to now talking to some software vendors, they are pushing out updates to their software almost on a daily basis. So again, you can see the challenge of trying to make sure that software is going to be secure, is going to be updated, is going to meet your needs, and is going to meet the needs of the PCI and the PCI assessors to ensure the security of the cardholder data, meant that we had to change. And so we over the last few years took some time to really look at what was the best practice. And from that, we've come up with our new software security framework. And throughout the time of this morning, or today, sorry, we'll go in a little bit more detail on how that's going to work. But in essence, Brian, that's a bit of the potted history as to why we've introduced the new software security framework.
Yeah, understandable. And we're definitely going to drill into some detail, but just touching on the overview of the evolution from PA-DSS to the SSF standard, to your point, Jeremy, the manner in which we address security and compliance with applications is dramatically different than the way we address networks and systems and other types of environments. There's a lot of different aspects to consider. So hence, the detail-pointed security standards for PA-DSS and the evolution of the SSF standard.
Yeah, that's correct. And just stress one of Jeremy's points. During the inception of PA-DSS, payment software evolved from simple proprietary on-prem implementations with just a few annual changes to automated continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines that produce software running on ephemeral instances in the cloud. So there has been quite significant changes in the industry and in technology in general.
Yeah, back when PA-DSS, to Jeremy's point, back in 2006 to 2008, roughly in that time frame, I mean, a lot of these concepts and technologies didn't even exist. And so there's this natural evolution of enhancing the security programs and addressing new technologies and the threats that are applicable to these new environments. In fact, I would even say within the last 5 years, there's been such a quantum leap ahead with technology and the way we operate and develop applications that it makes a lot of sense to transition from, maybe a new version number of PA-DSS to a completely new standard just because of the new technologies. We've got things where virtualization has evolved and cloud computing is evolving. Now we have serverless environments and hybrid agile development platforms. We even have application containers where, this concept of a system or this operating environment is kind of vague, and there's all these new technologies. So, the methods to use to secure applications yesterday doesn't protect tomorrow's computing environment. And I think you have to continuously evolve and evaluate where technology is at and advance your security program. We've increased the reliance on third-party technologies and libraries and platforms that definitely help speed the development process and time to market for applications, but it definitely also complicates the security program.
Yep, that's correct, and we will cover bits of that during this presentation and by presenting a new framework.
Yeah, so one of the things we wanted to do is just present a poll to the attendees. This is one of those things where we're always curious to see what's driving considerations for new security programs and what kind of things you're dealing with within your own organization. So I think we've got a poll on the screen. If you want to take a quick minute to go through that and make a determination on what's most relevant to your environment. So while we're going through that poll, today we're looking at the Software Security Framework Standard, which is replacing the PA-DSS program, and it's designed to support like we've mentioned the evolution of new technologies, new payment software types. There's so many changes in the way we operate systems and applications that it really made sense to evolve into this next dramatic change into the security and compliance framework.
Absolutely. And sorry, go ahead, Flavio.
No, that's fine. I was about to bring an introduction to the framework itself, but I don't want to interrupt you, Jeremy.
No, I was just going to say, I think the chart you had on the background is really good, and it shows you really just the time period that PA-DSS was running. And I think there are a couple of key dates there that are coming up that we really need to be aware of, and certainly before we lose them, I think perhaps whilst people are voting, we can sort of mention that number 5 there, which we can still see the end of June 2021 is actually a critical date, because not only as from the council are we introducing the new software security framework, it's important to get the message across that we're actually retiring the payment application data security standards. So PA-DSS is going to retire over the next couple of years. And the first key date in that process, which is coming up quite quickly, is the June deadline for new validations to be submitted, approved validations to be submitted for council approval. And they have to be into the council by the end of June, which means that if you're developing an application now that you want to get into the old PA-DSS system, first question is why not do it to the new software security? But depends how long it's been going. It may be something that you've just got to get through. Get it into the lab now, because it's got to be with the lab or with us for approval by the end of June, not into the lab for the commencement of evaluation. So really the times are quite tight. So this is a key date. We've been putting a lot of emphasis on it. If you visit our website, you'll see there's a countdown clock now running on the home page. So we see this as a really important date. We're trying everything we can do, and this webinar is a fantastic opportunity for us to be able to tell everybody the date is coming. It is the end of PA-DSS. New submissions will occur at the end of June this year. So if you're into PA-DSS, you're doing something, do please take action now.
So Jeremy, there's another critical date in October of next year as well, right?
That is absolutely correct, and that's really the end of the program. So the end of October 2022 is when we shut the doors. It's when we will close the PA-DSS program, and all software going forward will have to be approved against the new software security framework. Now, what does that mean if you've got a PA-DSS application then? Well, it's on our listing on our website. All of those previously approved PA-DSS solution will be moved into a new area, which is, if you look on it, you'll see there's an option for those devices which are acceptable only for pre-existing deployments. So it's a similar way we do manage our PTS, our hardware devices. They are approved for a period, and then after that, they will still remain on our website listed to show that they have been in the past approved. But going forward, how you're using them and if you're allowed to use them actually becomes a compliance question. So if you want to be able to continue to use PA-DSS software after October 2022, then you are going to have to talk to your brands. American Express, Discover JCB, MasterCard, Visa, Union Pay, whoever it is, go and talk to them and see if you can have that permission. It may be that you can continue to use them for previously approved or previously deployed solutions. I don't know, it's their call. But from the council's perspective, we will shut the doors, and going forward, everything will be to the new software security framework.
Very good. So we wanted to begin to highlight some of the differences between PA-DSS and the software security framework. And one of those topics is around the eligibility requirements for payment software. Flavio, is that something that you could describe to us in a little more detail, explain to us what the eligibility changes are between the two programs?
Yes, absolutely. And yes, as a matter of fact, there has been a change in the eligibility of the secure software lifecycle recently. And it moved from vendors of eligible software, the vendors of payment software to vendors of eligible software. And that presents an opportunity for payment software vendors that develop not only payment software that involved in processing, storing, and transmitting payment data, but also that may share resources defined within a payment environment without actually doing, we talk about this so many times, storing, processing, and transmitting payment data. But now there's an option for vendors that are part of the industry that are not specifically doing that can also be validated against the secure software lifecycle standard. Is that right, Jeremy?
No, absolutely. And I think just looking at the poll, I was also watching the poll results coming through. And I think the poll results were pretty much exactly what I expected, and pretty much were part of the reason why we had to go for the new process, which is actually people are doing everything. And that's one of the big changes. People are using so many different ways of utilizing, developing payment software, how it's being used in the payment process. This is, I think serverless is the only one that didn't get anything, but it shows you that we had to be more flexible. We had to take a more flexible approach to software security. And I think the eligibility criteria really is because going forward, we see this as something is going to be a modular program. It has certain modules at the moment, and going forward, as we develop new areas, we'll increase the number of modules. And I think about that eligibility, it may well be that future modules could include loyalty programs, could include other areas that are not directly related to the payment itself, but as Flavio said beautifully, could influence payment security. So it's going to be enable developers to really ensure that whatever software is running on the payment device, then we can have confidence that it is going to be protecting the cardholder data.
Yeah, Jeremy, that's a great point. I was kind of surprised to see that the serverless environment, didn't get more votes, just because we're seeing a lot of clients moving in that direction, because it does support this concept of continuous integration and continuous delivery. But I think we'll see that expand probably over the next year. Another major change from PA-DSS to SSF is this modular architecture and the control-based objective methods for the standard versus what we're used to traditionally with, strict requirements 1, 2, and 3. Flavio, can you provide or give us a little bit of background and detail on this change? I mean, I think this one is fairly significant because it changes quite a bit the way we go about looking at the security controls for payment applications.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, the modular architecture and the control objectives are probably from a methodological point of view, the biggest changes. But before we enter there, I think it will be good for our audience to have a good understanding of the framework itself and to understand that the framework contains 2 independent programs. And I mention this because this is one of the most confusing part we receive from our customers some questions because they are quite confused about this. It's a framework. It's the first time we have to deal with a framework and not just with a standard. And we have heard many questions around this. So I prefer to start by stressing this and understanding these building blocks because it will be more easy than to go through the other concepts. So as I mentioned, we have a framework that comprised of 2 different programs, 2 independent programs that interacts with one another within the framework, but they're independent. And what do I mean by independent? Well, they have their own program guides, their own standards, their own validations, and their own listings. And as a matter of fact, they are validating very different things. The Secure Software Lifecycle Standard validates a company, the process, procedures, policies, governance of a company through the process of designing, developing, deploying, and maintaining secure payment software. And on the other program, the Secure Software Standard will validate directly payment software. And that is the direct replacement of PA-DSS, a payment application that was previously listed under the payment application validated listing in the Council's portal will be listed in the new list of validated payment software. And the Secure Software Lifecycle, again, validates a company, and that is an optional standard. So with those concepts in mind, we can now move towards the modularized approach or modularized architecture, which is something Jeremy previously mentioned. We have modules. We have different modules, and this is what provides scalability to the program. Because as we will go through time, new modules will be added. And as a matter of fact, there is one module that has been in the news recently, which is the terminal module that has been announced to be published soon, that will allow payment software that runs on PTS devices or terminals to be validated against the Secure Software Standard. Is that right, Jeremy?
No, absolutely. I was really hoping that I was going to come on the call on the webinar today to announce that it was actually released. It was originally due for release today. Unfortunately, as with all of these things, we're very good at this sometimes within the council. One of the last minute checks, we had to just go and make a slight alteration. So actually we've had to push back the release date, and it's going to be before the end of April. So hopefully the end of April, the new terminal module will be released and available.
Jeremy, do you know if the terminal module, is that going to address general payment applications on the device, or is it also going to complement PA-PDPE for a formal PDPE type application?
That is a good question. Certainly the former definitely is true. I don't know about the other. I'll need to double check on that.
Okay, no worries. Okay.
So I'm going to jump in as well, actually, because Flavio introduced the Secure SLC program very well. And actually, from the council's perspective, this is one of the most exciting parts of the new software security framework. Flavio was perfectly correct. This is aimed at approving the vendors, and it's aimed at approving the vendors is essential for us to be able to make a new software evaluation program that can meet the needs of the high-speed development of the continual patching. So what this is really focused on the secure lifecycle is that, as well as approving the software, what we will do is we'll approve the vendor. We'll go and check that they have got a good development practice, that they have got good good quality control measures in place, that they follow those quality control measures when they're developing and releasing software, and when also, if they're doing any patches or updates to that software, that is going to follow these procedures very well. Everything is going to be controlled and controlled and recorded. So what this means is, once we've approved the vendor as a secure SLC vendor, then if they do any changes or updates or patches to software that they are developing, then they will send us notification. So instead of this having to go to the evaluation laboratory to go through a lengthy validation, that update comes straight to us, and we can then very quickly update the listing on our website. And this is really important for merchants and for other users, because it means that you can be confident that the software you're using is the most up-to-date, is approved. And that is going to be important when you're doing your PCI DSS, because the QSA is wanting to go and check, are you using approved software? And in the past, with the PA-DSS, it was always a bit, well, I think I've got the most recent update. But now you're going to have much more confidence, because it is going to be continually approved. So that's making life easier and quicker, especially for those vendors who are doing daily updates, to know that we can react to that, and everyone can have confidence in the product. The other thing that's going to change with that is that for the software, we're not going to have wildcards. It's going to be the listing of that version, full listing, because you don't need it. The wildcards were really a sort of get around to this issue that we were facing with updates, multiple updates within a year. So now we can have confidence, and you can have confidence, it is going to be the listed version, it is going to be approved, because we're using the SLC. And as Flavio said, we are training the assessors separately. They have to go through a secure SLC assessor training program, so they will be validated, and they can do that check and make sure that the vendors are following the process correctly. So for us, this is probably one of the most exciting and the biggest changes. So yeah, I can understand that it's new and it's caused a bit of confusion, but it really is going to help things going forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. This is a dramatic change from the way a lot of the other standards have been managed. Allowing the application vendor to submit their Delta changes after they get through the SLC program. I mean, this is a fundamental change in the way we're managing security and compliance with the program. And with a lot of these changes, it's just like the P2PE program back in the day when version 1 came out. There were a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty about how we jump into this program, how do we adopt this, how do we get on board, and over the last few years, P2PE has evolved. We're now at version 3, and we've got this modular approach to P2PE, where you've got components that can be individually assessed instead of the entire program. And so, Flavio, can you talk a little bit about the early adopters program?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, we also like to stress those dates that Jeremy mentioned, because those are critical dates. And throughout the last year, we have developed an early adopters pioneers program to facilitate the onboarding process of existing payment applications and vendors into the SSF, into the new framework. And our experience is that despite different plans, it's not a direct transition. It takes time and effort. So our message here is, please, by all means, start as soon as possible. Get in contact with the standards, get in contact with your QSA companies, try to start the process, the migration process, as soon as possible, especially because we are in the middle of April and new submission for new payment applications will be available till the end of June this year. So if there are new payment applications that will have to be transition to the new standard, it will take time. It will take time, effort. New things will have to be taken into consideration. The scope has changed. This is something we'll discuss later on. So our best message here is, just start as soon as possible, because our experience shows us that it's not a direct transition. We'll have to put more effort and look at things from a different angle as well.
Flavio, that's a really, really good point. And certainly for the merchants on the call, going forward, the 28th of October feels like tomorrow in payments. It's very quickly approaching. And what we need to make sure is that as merchants, you're talking to your software vendors and saying, are you pushing this new software through the PCI software security framework? Because there is that migration, we are going to have to move. And as Flavio quite rightly said, this is a new process, it needs to bed in, and the vendors are going to have to get used to that new process. And again, we've trained the experts, we've trained the Phygenics people, so they fully understand what is required and how it's going to work. And so to talk to the assessors early means that the vendors can then work together to understand and how to get used to this new process and really find our way through it. And that's going to take time. So Flavio is really right. The earlier you start this process, the better, so that you can walk through it and learn from it. Because once you've done it a couple of times, it will become second nature. As Brian said, we really saw this with point-to-point encryption. That took a couple of years to really sort of start picking up. And now there's significant support for it. But we need to move this one a little quicker if we can. So we need the vendors to start picking up the standard and start working to it. We need the merchants to be aware of it. We need the acquirers and processors to be aware of it as well. So we can get this whole shift across to the new software framework really is a simple and easy journey. So the one thing we don't want to do is disrupt payment. So if we can start earlier, then absolutely that's going to be better.
So Jeremy or Flavio, whichever of you wants to respond to this question, I'm curious. So if you've got organizations that are developing their applications and looking to jump into the secure software standard, would you recommend that they go down the application validation first or the secure SLC standard first? Is there a preference on which validation you think they most benefit from?
I think from the council's perspective, we're going to want to get some baseline for that vendor. So putting the application through is going to be advantageous, because then we'll see that, or we'll get from the report that actually, yes, these guys do develop good software. It's been validated as such. So yes, they're on a good starting point. So we need that baseline that, yes, you're a good developer. So then we can move across to the SSLC. So it flows that way. But from my perspective, I think doing it that way around, it'll be easier.
Okay, good. So Diana, we've got another poll that we wanted to ask the attendees which standard they're considering, or potentially both.
Yes, and while we have the poll, I just want to mention that our experience shows that Jeremy's right, and it's also a case-by-case scenario. We have interacted with companies that have several payment applications that will have to transition, in which case embracing the processes and embracing the secure software lifecycle, it's probably a good start. But we have other cases where companies only have one payment application that is the core of their business, and migrated that first makes more sense, and then to transition also to the secure software lifecycle afterwards. So that baseline is definitely required. And that's also why our message here is reach out to us, reach out to your QSA company, and start the process. We are anticipating that we are going to have quite a lot of migrations from Q3, 4, and Q1 to next year. Q3, 4 this year, Q1 to next year, before hitting October. So it will be busy times.
Very good. So we want to jump into some detail. Let's see, I think we got the poll results here.
So we've got some work to do on 47% of the attendees.
Yeah, I suppose we do, don't we? So we wanted to jump into some detail around some of the control objectives that are new to SSF. First thing we want to do is kind of frame that up so that we can better understand some of the changes to the program. One of the things that is dramatically different in the SSF program is the focus on what's defined as critical assets. Flavio, can you kind of go down that description of this new concept of critical assets? I mean, honestly, I think the idea was present in PA-DSS, but perhaps not as clearly defined as it is in the new program.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. Usually when we talk about PA-DSS, we focus on protecting cardholder and sensitive authentication data. And, you know, that has been core in the PCI world for years and still is. However, we have to think that the payment software now is expected to be resilient on itself, disregarding on running on a PCI DSS environment. It can still support that, but we will have to take into consideration not only account data, but all the security features, data, functions, and resources that are part of that payment software. And that global concept is critical assets. Usually, and also explicitly defined in the standard, critical assets are sensitive data, sensitive functions, and sensitive resources. And by sensitive data, again, it's not only account data, it's any data that will require protection. Basically from unauthorized disclosure or modification. And think about security CIA triad. Unauthorized disclosure is confidentiality and modification is integrity. So any data that requires protection in terms of confidentiality and integrity will have to be considered sensitive data. And this might dramatically change our scope because we will be protecting cardholder data, sensitive authentication data, but we'll also have to consider tokens, cryptographic key material, authentication credentials, or any internal system information. But at the same time, that data that might require protection will be related to other standards or other things that the vendor considers critical to their business model, like GDPR data, like PII, session data, software design characteristics, even error messages can become sensitive data in the concept of that particular payment software. So I will leave sensitive data as such and move towards sensitive functions, the second definition. And that is any function in the payment software that can alter the functionality or configuration that processes sensitive data or provides security features. So at the end of the day, are all those functions that interact with sensitive data that can change their ways of configuration or protect it. And you can think of examples like cryptographic methods used to protect sensitive data or encryption key management functions in the software, functions that provide authentication, or something that is almost in every payment software that processes account data, those functions that prepare the authorization message before it's sent for authorization. So all of those functions will be considered sensitive functions and will also have to be protected. And finally, the other concept is sensitive resources. And these are external resources that provide software with security features or that also process sensitive data. And you have to remember that now we have to consider the software execution environment. Again, this is not expected to run on a PCI DSS validated environment only. The software itself might also include a software execution environment. So we have to consider those resources from underlying platforms, operating systems, and other applications that coexist within or outside the software execution environment. So we have to consider registry keys, share files, cache, system interfaces, APIs, and other communication channels. So what's important to understand here is that we move the scope from account data to something broader that is critical to provide security to the payment software. And those are critical assets. And there is a reason why that's control objective one. Control objective one is to identify and classify those critical assets. That's your starting point. You have to define your scope. And that is one of the biggest changes here.
Yeah, so this idea of this change and this idea of the scope of the application assessment focusing on critical assets. So this is a little different than what we've seen in PA-DSS. So, and it's a topic, there's no way we can address it and cover it all in 5 or 10 minutes. So if you have follow-up questions, please send us an email, reach out to us, and we'll try to answer some quick questions through email, or we can even set up a conference call and talk through the implications of the SSF program as it pertains to critical assets. So the last part of the webinar, we wanted to jump into some more granular detail. This is where we're going to have to nerd out on you a little bit. I apologize, but there's a couple control objectives that are brand new to SSF that did not exist in PA-DSS, and we wanted to touch on a couple of those. And since we're running a little bit short on time, I'm going to go ahead and jump into one of them. So the Secure Software Standard control objective number 9 refers to attack detection. This is brand new. This is what honestly, I'm gonna, if I have to put on my techie hat and geek out a little bit, this is what I'm kind of excited about. This is pretty cool. This is a concept that I've worked on in the past several years ago, working with organizations developing payment applications specifically, and thinking about the fact that, your traditional network IDSs that look predominantly at protocols and web application firewalls that, take it to the next level and can look at and identify, more specific application layer attacks. There's still a number of vulnerabilities that only the application would know, whether or not certain input fields or configuration files or other things that it's working with have been modified outside of authorized channels, or something looks completely wrong. And this is where the application risk assessment is really the foundation of control objective 9 for attack detection. The first thing you have to do is clearly define the application footprint. How does it operate? What is it interacting with? What services and communications, databases? How is the application touching different parts of the system and network environment and interacting with other surfaces? After you identify the application footprint, you want to begin to take a step back and say, okay, what does the attack surface look like? And you kind of overlay that application footprint with the application or with the attack surface. And after you combine those two, you can begin to evaluate risk based on the likelihood of a compromise, the impact of the application in the business if it were compromised, and obviously the ability to circumvent security controls. So part of an effective risk assessment is to look at, what controls do we have in place to prevent these type of attacks from occurring, and then what is the likelihood of an attacker being able to circumvent those security controls. So one of the projects that I worked on a few years back was developing these attack detection mechanisms within the overall application. And I apologize, we came up with kind of a cheesy name for the for this concept back then. Linux has always got these applications that they name after bugs and insects and different kind of animals and things like that. So we codenamed this project APHIDS. It's kind of a play on application intrusion detection system. But basically what this is we developed a list of attack detection mechanisms that are sprinkled throughout the application in critical points based on the results of the risk assessment. And we said, okay, based on these type of attacks, these are the things that we could say, this is not simply an error in the application or perhaps mistyped information from a UI, from a user or something. When you see this type of data or information or change in the application environment, you're pretty well assured that that is some form of attack against the application. So what we did is we implemented measures to look for those changes, look for those things that were more than just errors or user input changes, whatever, things that would clearly identify an attack. You know, perhaps you've got a field that's expecting card data in a web application or something, and you get binary data or stuff that's non-numeric, escape characters, things like that. That's generally not something where a user accidentally typed the wrong thing. That would identify a potential attack. And in that project that we did a few years ago, we created logging to provide us the source IP address and other data to profile the source of the attack, the nature of the attack. We built in native SNMP alerting to the application so that it would send an alert not only to the logging system, but also to the Security Operations Center to alert that something was taking place. And in a couple specialized places within the application, we ended up deciding to do something a little bit different that I thought was pretty cool at the time. And it's basically automating countermeasures. So if you have an attack signature that you've defined as something that is, again, clearly not an error, you're 99% certain this is a form of attack against the application, you can deploy countermeasures. And the countermeasures might be anything from, you know, within the standard, it talks about dealing with brute force attacks against passwords and then locking out the access to prevent someone from attempting to log in. One of the things we did back then was creating a SOC, a service application that ran in the Security Operations Center, that when it received alerts from the application, it would actually send an update to the firewall and block the public IP address from where that was coming from. If you think about it, that's the way, you know, traditional network IDSs and web application firewalls work anyway. So adding this layer of blocking that network traffic from an application layer is basically the next evolution of you know, deploying countermeasures from an attack. Now, obviously, I'm sure everyone's thinking, oh, well, if you've got multiple people, you know, from a single office or something like that, where you know, you could potentially lock out 100 people from accessing the application. Those kind of things were considered. And if you have an effective logging system, you can do a simple search in your logging system or a select out of a database to say, was this public IP address associated with successful access, so that we don't lock out those other people. And if it's from a single IP address, and we can just say, hey, this is the only source that this application has seen, and the only communication we've received is an attack, then you can feel more comfortable in blocking that network traffic before it ever reaches the application. Again, this was more of a web application type scenario. The manner in which you evaluate attack detection, alerting, and countermeasures within, say, a point of sale application or other things like that that are not public facing necessarily is going to differ. But again, this model of walking through, defining the application footprint, defining the attack surface, and then performing an application layer risk assessment. And an application layer risk assessment, the scoring is very similar, looking at the likelihood, impact, and the ability to circumvent security controls. That scoring mechanism is very similar to other types of risk assessments, but the manner in which you look at where those risks are and what that attack surface looks like is going to be dramatically different than a traditional network or system risk assessment. So a lot of communication there. Flavio, did you want to jump into the next one?
Well, actually, I think you touched a very important point here. It's one of the things I really like most about the secure software standard, is that it not only talks about having a robust risk management or robust risk management practices, but it provides control objectives that clearly helps companies and payment software developers to do that. And you mentioned, for example, identifying the application footprint. Well, that's control objective 1. You have to identify and classify what you want to protect. Those are your critical assets. And then you talk about, the attack surface, and that's control objective 4, critical asset protection. You have to think like an attacker. You have to determine how will those critical assets be attacked, define attack vectors, define the attack surface. And once you have that, to build appropriate controls, this can be called countermeasures, protection mechanisms, mitigations, but you will define those based on your critical assets and the attack surface. And after that, you can jump to, you can actually jump to control objective 9 or 10, depending on how you want to move. But the attack detection, the part that control objective 9, that you have defined, that how those countermeasures are applied to the software when it's running after deployment. So those are the resiliency aspects of the software that can, during execution, have functions to identify abnormal behavior and to take actions, to alert and take actions of those cases. And control objective 10 to me is the one that consistently covers it all, because it takes part of threat identification covering control objective 4, and also adds vulnerability management to it, using typical vulnerability management sources like CDSS. But the thing is, risk management will be incorporated into software development life cycle for control objective 10. And also mitigations, those mitigations that you have defined, those countermeasures, will also have to be validated during the life cycle. So to me, this is way more not only expanded, but better treated that, for example, PA-DSS requirements 5.5 and 7.1 that talked about risk management or threat identification. Here we have specific control objectives that serve specific purposes and that actually help us to do that, to have a robust risk management practice, and also to identify risk, to identify threats, and to come up with countermeasures.
Jeremy, we did a lot of review, a lot of talking there. I just wanted to touch base with you to see if you had any final comments on some of the things we talked about. Again, we kind of focused in and drilled in on a couple of the control objectives that are new to the secure software standard. So any final comments or thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. So I think what I hope people have got a feel of from this webinar is this is a new approach. It's going to bring software security testing into the 2020s and beyond. It is something that is going to evolve going forward. It's going to take a little bit of time to get used to, but it's going to hopefully provide a better service for your needs. If you're a vendor, if you're a merchant, if you're a processor, the process of the software security framework is better designed to meet the changing needs of modern payments, however that's going to go forward. And I think, as Flavio said earlier on, it is time to start making that change. Reach out to your vendor, reach out to your QSAs and start talking about this. One other thing I would quickly mention before we run out of time is the council has introduced training programs, obviously, for our assessors, but we've also introduced something called informational training, which allows anybody to take part in the training. You just don't take the exam. So if you want to learn more about the secure software lifecycle or the secure software application process, do take part in the informational training. The details are on our website. But I think hopefully everyone's found this useful. I found it always useful just to learn more about how these things are working. Do remember the dates. The dates are critical. End of June for final submissions, end of October for the program closing. And that's a summary for myself, Brian. Okay,
very good. Diana, do you have any closing remarks or pointing people to our blog or supporting email, or how they might reach back out to us for additional information?
It was a very productive session, and thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for organizing it for Genix.
Thanks for your help, Jeremy. Appreciate you supporting us in this webinar.